open saying we've a right to fight for the right to work.
It was the last great battle of the organised industrial class.
And insofar as they use power, they must use it responsibly.
Today, the focus of the picketing by the striking miners moved to Scotland, and the focus of the police moved with them.
Our descendants will read about the miners' revolt of 1984.
In 1984, coal miners in the UK went on strike to defend their unions' rights and their communities against a government more committed to economic and social responsibilities. Civil rights organizations supported this struggle, and its defeat has reshaped government responsibilities and workers' rights to the present day. This is the story of the 1984 miners' strike in Britain.
In this underground city of pit props and darkness is being hewn or won the centuries-old petrified forests that have become coal. Coal vital to man and his industry.
By the 1970s, the coal industry produced a third of Britain's electricity and employed 250,000 miners. Many still lived in towns and communities of families, schools, churches and shops sustained by the mining industry.
Over 170,000 of these miners were members of the National Union of Mine Workers, or the NUM. To fight for the right to fair wages, the NUM had organized strikes in 1969, 1972, and 1974. The last of which restricted electricity across Britain and unseated the ruling Conservative Party.
But in 1979, the Conservatives returned to power under a new leader, determined to crush what she and many others in the country saw as the irresponsible use of union power.
When one side has tremendous power, you wouldn't call that a position of even balance. And that's why I say the law has to be changed. And insofar as they use power, they must use it responsibly. So we call it responsible collective bargaining.
But while the unions were powerful, the UK coal industry was struggling. Production had fallen 56% since 1913, and the government-owned mines were losing $275 million a year.
Thatcher's government took this opportunity to pass laws restricting the rights of unions to strike, restricting strikes in support of other unions, and encouraging employers to fire striking workers.
I will never ever be a party to Tory party legislation which seeks to castrate and mutilate this trade union movement.
That was Arthur Scargill, the radical president of the NUM. The union was furious about the legislation and said that miners deserved the right to advocate for better wages. But this did not deter the government. In 1984, Ian McGregor, the newly appointed head of the government-controlled National Coal Board, made secret plans to shut down over 70 coal mines and lay off 60,000 workers, thus prioritizing economic over social responsibilities.
I'm talking about the sons and daughters of miners who have a right to have a job in this industry. We're talking about our communities.
Mr. McGregor.
The only opportunity that these people will have in the future is to work in pits that are reasonably equipped and are reasonably efficient, and that's what I have promised to give the industry.
Tensions were high when, on March 1st, 1984, the National Coal Board suddenly announced that Cortonwood, a colliery in South Yorkshire, would be given 5 weeks to close. That Sunday, a meeting with its local NUM branch was called.
And the decision was a unanimous one, that Corton would immediately take strike action.
On March 8th, the NUM Executive Committee voted to support striking Yorkshire and Scotland miners, officially starting the miners' strike. Union members of Flying Pickets travelled nationwide, rallying miners to join. Despite many arrests, they convinced most local unions to strike. By late March, 142,000 miners were striking across Britain, picketing their former workplaces. Even miners whose pits were not directly threatened by the closures went on strike, for the strike of 1984 was fundamentally different from previous strikes.
I think that's why the miners' strike of 1984-5 was so kind of different to many other industrial disputes, because it wasn't about pay and conditions, it was about the preservation of a job and de facto the preservation of a particular way of life. And when you close that mine, the community starts to fragment and disappear. So that's where the slogan, close a coal mine, kill a community comes from. That mining was more than a source of employment, it was a way of life.
Starting within mining communities, the strike turned from a struggle for miners' rights into a broader social and political movement. Women's support groups were formed, setting up soup kitchens, marching, giving speeches, and picketing in support of the miners, turning many into activists with more political awareness.
celebrating the fact that we've got a miners' union and a trade union movement in this country, because every right that you and I have been fought for, and they've been fought for against unjust laws.
For the first time, civil rights organizations also mobilized to fundraise for and support the miners. Most famously, Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. These groups saw supporting the miners' strike as their responsibility as part of a larger fight against a government determined to curtail their civil rights.
It's important that if you're defending communities, that you also defend all communities and not just one.
As 20,000 marched through London in support of the miners, the government became increasingly concerned. Officials portrayed the strike as an irresponsible action, led by a violent minority infringing on the rights of miners wishing to work.
And we must watch out for it, because they're not true representatives of the majority, and sometimes they deny the majority the right to speak, because they know they won't support the tiny minority.
Strikebreakers, miners who continued to work during the strike, were branded as scabs. They often faced violence from the miners in strike and needed to be escorted in police vans to the pits.
But the Thatcher government did not uphold their social responsibility to the miners. Newly released documents showed that they tapped union leaders' telephones and subverted courts to prosecute miners, violating their rights to privacy and a fair trial.
The government also condoned widespread police violence, most notably at the Orgreave coking plant in Yorkshire. On June 18th, anticipating picketers would block coal transport, the police deployed 6,000 officers with horses and rear gear. As the pickets advanced, the chief ordered a mounted charge against them.
With the government refusing to take responsibility for the violence, the Battle of Orgreave was a pivotal moment in the miners' strike.
And we see the full force of the state there. It seems quite clear that the state is willing to invest vast amounts of resources in order to defeat the strike.
As the strike dragged on through the winter of 1984, miners began to run out of money, with many breaking the strike and drifting back to work. Finally, the National Union of Mine Workers conceded to the government on March 3, 1985.
The National Union of Mine Workers shall organise a return to work on Tuesday.
The defeat of the miners' strike marked the triumph of economic responsibilities over social responsibilities and union rights. Over the next few years, a weakened NUM could not prevent further pit closures, costing 100,000 miners their jobs.
The strike led Thatcher and her government to further erode union rights, making it harder for employees to strike and coinciding with the global decline of labour rights. Neoliberal policies spurred economic growth, but prosperity was not shared equally. With unions weakened, wealth and income became more concentrated.
Today, the effects of the defeat are clear in the UK's ongoing economic crisis, where inequality has deepened in the workforce. Now only who are unionized face serious issues.
You've got low wages, low skills, and rising levels of inequality. And I think in some ways, you can trace this back to the defeat of the miners' strike at the end of 1985.
The miners' strike has remained divisive, with the government still denying responsibility for police violence during the strike.
Former mining communities, among the hardest hit by the erosion of union rights and rising inequality, are now some of the poorest areas in Britain.
The effect on the coal fields, there's above average levels of unemployment, there's above average levels of poverty, and all the kind of health impacts. The long-term impact has been kind of severe and is still being felt in those communities.
The 1984 miners' strike was a fight for union rights and community survival, backed by civil rights groups against the government prioritizing economic responsibility. Its defeat enabled the government to curtail union rights, leading to increased inequality.
But the tide may be turning. Recent years have seen a global resurgence in labor unions, especially among younger workers.
So here we are again, another Tory government, another attack on the fundamental human right to strike.
As they regain influence, we must ask, what rights must workers reclaim to protect their jobs and resist inequality, as the miners tried to do in 1984? And how should future governments balance social and economic responsibility to prevent injustice?